Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission. This is your gateway to insights and inspiration as we strive to be better together. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Gold Mine. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I am stoked as this is going to be a continuation of last week's show, and I cannot wait to get into it. Now, while I am stoked, y'all should be too. Do the things like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff, get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Wednesdays for The Gold Mine and Fridays for The Collective. Now, we can get anything going right off the bat, but first off, let's get some intros. Nick, new to the show, hit us up, 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you, where you come from, all that good stuff.
I'm Nick Felber, pro MMA fighter. I train in Lethbridge, Alberta. I'm originally from Calgary, Alberta. Served in 3 RCR, 3 PPCLI, and I'm born to do violent things, I guess.
There you go. I like it. Pat, how about yourself?
Pat Miller, 20 years in the military, mainly infantry, 8 years special operations, CSOR and JTF2. And I am now a photographer and armorer in the film industry.
Bam. I like it. Seb, how's the cold treating you down there now?
Well, we'll see. I can't really use my hands as of yet, so hopefully I can make some notes here in the next 10, 15 minutes. Spend the morning out there playing with the horses and the donkeys and all of the things that burn money and don't do much for you.
Yeah. Who would have thought that hay costs so much money?
Man.
It does. Shaun, how's the mountains treating you?
Well, things are good out here. I got to say that very quickly before I came into this, while I was brewing my coffee, coming into this podcast, I threw up a photo in my Instagram stories, and I just titled it "The Violence Game," and I added y'all so that you could see it. It was a photo. Old schooly photo, monochromatic photo that was taken when I was at the Ontario Police College as a use of force instructor shortly after I'd left JTF2. And so the reason that I put that photo up there is because the violence game, as Nick said, he was born to do it. I feel like I was born to do it. And I look at this panel and I think that we're all born to do it. Now, the problem with the violence game, or the idea of violence is that society as a whole is kind of split. People who don't understand violence think that they're in the violence game. And then the people who are in violence, who do understand the violence game, will look at the violence game completely differently. So when I throw up that photo with the violence game, the only people that understand the photo are people who've been in it. Everyone else that looks at that photo will maybe have a negative reaction because they'll just see violence, and violence has a negative connotation. But in my opinion, violence, the understanding of it, is necessary for everyone, for every man, woman, and child. You have to be able to understand violence in order to have an opinion on it.
I like where you're going with this. Let's get some thoughts on it. The game of violence. And I want to get Nick's opinion right off the bat because he's new here. So he's going to throw it right in the fire. What are your thoughts on the game of violence?
The game of violence, I think it's a very complicated one, right? Because you have the sport aspect of violence, and then you have the realistic aspect of violence where, you start incorporating life or death situations, realistic situations out in the world, like military or, even law enforcement, or just in general, like hand-to-hand combat, right? It's a very complex game, and we're constantly seeing new kind of avenues open with it and new perspectives, and we live in a changing world daily, right? And nowadays it seems to be very relevant, and with the way everything's kind of shifting in the world right now, I think having the availability but also the capability to do violence and to understand it is becoming more and more important. And especially just in our society now, right, there's this fine line of what's acceptable and what's not, especially just in like a society-based kind of perspective. But then it's I think especially nowadays, more people need to have and hear conversations like these ones with these type of guys and get an understanding of it, because eventually, like you guys said in that previous take on Wednesday, you will be faced with it at some point in your life. You're going to have a situation where you might need it, or just in general, like you should have an understanding of it. And situational, everything's different. And I think it is becoming a necessity to understand it and to have it.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that, especially with the climate going on right now in North America. Pat, what's your take on this?
Well, it's interesting because the game of violence, it's kind of like, wow, you kind of have to either see it and recognize it, or you have to at least accept it, because there's so many people in the world today that'll have a naive blindness to it. They want to have a naive blindness to it, but they will never escape it. At some point they'll be exposed to it. Unless you live in a perfect bubble in your house and never leave, order everything to the house, you will be exposed to violence at some point. And on a society level, like, we're not talking like media or anything like that. I know people that will avoid violent things and violent movies on purpose because it gives them a bad feeling. If you're that naive to it, like, you're setting yourself up for a real downfall, not just in the fact that you may not be able to defend yourself or recognize a violent episode, but also the psychological, like, damage that will happen because you won't be exposed to it at any level. You would not be inoculated to that scenario or event. So I think some people avoiding the game of violence, that's dangerous. And then those that are in it, I think that there's a spectrum there. There's a wide spectrum of those that like take it very seriously and practice it, think about it and research it, even look at the history of it. And then there's some people that just have like almost like a naive sense that, oh yeah, if I'm gonna fight, I can just be reactive and I'm just gonna, I'm gonna win. So it's kind of interesting, the spectrum of society with violence.
You don't know my mentality, bro. I'm gonna use that every time. I don't know why. It's just so fantastic. Seb, what are your thoughts on it?
I'll just see red, bro. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, we called it the violence game. It evidently isn't a game. It has catastrophic consequences, but the real issue is, I think that divide is a critical piece, and we're seeing it right now. The divide is interesting because there is a quote that says something along the lines of, nobody wants a warrior until the enemy's at the gate. It's like, we are here today having these conversations in the environment that we have, free of having these debates and these constructive conversations in any way, shape, or form, and we're barely regulated, in that sense. There's a reason for that, because people did violence to allow us to have that freedom of speech and that freedom that we have today. And then we forget, and then we remember once a day or once a year on the 11th of November that, there were actually people that sacrificed it all on account of the stuff that we're able to do today, essentially. But this is not, it goes beyond that. It continues. There are people that walk around everywhere on account of somebody that had the capacity and the willingness to do violence on their behalf. And so I think that it's a dangerous trap to think, especially if you're in a world of violence. So say if you do violence on a professional level, it's definitely a trap to think that violence is absolutely everywhere, because I think you can start engaging in life as if everything is going to turn into violence at any moment. And yes, taking precautions is one thing, but living life like the 1% of the things that you deal with 100% of the time becomes the 100% of your world is not a way to live either. So you have to find the right balance. You have to have the ability to do certain things, but you also have the ability to see the other side, and without making it sort of nihilism almost, right? Because that is not a way to live either. So it's just a fine balance.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because when I came back from Afghanistan, one of the first things that bothered me the most was like garbage on the side of the road, which here in Canada, not that big of a deal. You see a garbage bag on the side of the road, it's like, oh man, that guy littered, or that fell off the back of a truck or whatever. And I was like, oh my God, I need to set up a cordon. Where's my guys? Da-da-da. Like, my mind was still set in the ways that I had just learned from Afghanistan. And that's it's something that we all kind of take with us forward through. Once you are inaugurated into the world of violence, it kind of takes a little bit. I can't say it takes something away from you, but I think it does. And I want to get your guys' initial thoughts on this. When you enter into the world of violence, when you first start training martial arts, or you first join the military, or you first join the police force, whatever, and you start being shown how violent the world can be, what's lost? What do we lose as humans? Shaun, I'm going to hit you first, and then we're going to go around. What do you think?
Okay, I'm going to give you my first thought on your question, and it is this. What do you lose? It's not what I lose. It's what everyone around me loses. This is just my first thought. I could take it a bajillion ways. So what do I mean by that? And what hopped into my head was I got a DM this morning from a guy. I'm not going to give his name out, but he sends me a DM infrequently. Not that often, maybe once a month, once every couple of months, whatever. And so the DM was one of these kind of memey videos, and it was, "You're awesome." It was one of those spiels where the video goes on to explain how I'm a good guy doing good things, and people are thankful for it. Like, I watched the whole clip. It was, and I usually don't watch these things when someone sends me these goofy memes. It was about maybe 20 seconds long, and I thought, I think you sent this to the wrong guy. And so my response to him was, "Dude, did you send this to the wrong guy?" And his response was, "Yeah, I know it's a bit soft for a guy like you, but thanks, man, genuinely, for what you do for the community." And I was like, what? So, violence, what it's done to me is something, but what it's done to everyone around me is something else. And so, because of the life I've lived, because of the life we've all lived, perception is reality. And the general perception out there, for some people who maybe don't know me really well, they might just think that I'm a hard ass who just like wants to kick everything's ass every single second of the day. But I got another side to me, the humanism in me. And I think that violence, if someone only views you as a tool that is good at kicking ass, then it strips the humanism out of you through their eyes. Like, I know who I am. There's parts of me that no one knows about except me. But what most people see, the perception, is that I don't have any of those things inside of me. I'm just like a hard ass. So, perception is everything. What did violence do? Well, maybe it stripped out some of the humanism through other people's eyes.
I'm digging this already. Pat, you got thoughts?
Yeah, I could maybe kind of double down on that with Shaun's comment, is the fact that, I mean, there is a level of naivety that kind of like that's one of the things you lose, right? Like, if you walk around the world and you don't think that there's going to be violence, you just kind of walk around thinking that everyone's good. And it gives you that contrast of what is, what can potentially happen. So you kind of do lose a little bit of innocence and a bit of being naive, because now when you go out into a situation, you start to attune. I guess if anything, it's kind of like the beginning of your spider sense, right? When you first get exposed to violence, and violence is kind of introduced to you, and you understand the capability of violence, and you understand the capability of yourself, right? It creates a contrast in which you can look at the world. But that goes two ways. I think there's two sides of that. Like, you could walk around in fear and look into situations of like a group, like a bunch of bikers, like, oh, these guys are gonna friggin' beat me up or whatever. But if you actually understand violence and you understand situations, that situational awareness becomes grows and becomes better. It actually brings a beauty to life, because it's just like, like the bittersweet thing in life, right? It's, you have a contrast. You with violence, you understand, you can see beauty easier, you can see friendship better, you can see all these other things. So you actually creates, a blooming of your human existence, even though, a lot of times violence is seen as bad. It creates a contrast of good, in a sense.
I didn't even think about that angle. Nick, you got any thoughts on this?
I think Shaun said it like perfectly. I think violence can take away from other people's perspective of you. One thing I've kind of heard multiple times is, especially like, I'm just going to dive into myself for a second here. Like, when I've had a fight, I'll go fight, and it's a barbaric, it's barbaric, and I'm in a different state of mind in the cage, and I'm presenting myself as this very intense human being, and then I come out of the cage and I immediately shut that down. It's that switch. It's that ability to control that aggression and that I guess beast inside of you. But then when I come out of the cage, I'm a nice guy. And, I've had people come up to me afterwards, after doing, like, just mauling someone, and they're like, you are the scariest guy, like, to watch fight, or this or that, and then you're like the softest hearted, nicest guy outside of the cage. And it's like, yeah, it's that ability to distinguish when violence is necessary, have great capability for it, but, remain human, keep your moral values in check. And, you see it a lot, especially with, like, the pro fighters and other people, right? Their egos kind of take over, and then they start carrying themselves if they're this, like, godlike figure. It's like, no, we're still human. We can still die very easily, right? And, like Shaun said it perfectly. I love Pat's take on it too, but it robs you. Violence can rob you, I guess, of other people's perception more than anything. But if you stay true to who you are, right, and you allow the world, to see that good side, that ability to not be violent, that ability to just be genuine and kind, and just be human, but also be a savage. When I teach, like, my teens at CMC, I always tell them controlled violence, right? We do what we do. We go in there, we win, we put our heart on the line, and we come out and we're kind, we're good to people. We never hold it over them. And you're always humble, and always stay humble. Because if you're not, well, as you guys know, there's always a bigger fish. And, there's always someone more violent, right? So I think there's so many avenues I could go down for this subject. It's such a broad thing, right? But yeah, I think it can definitely take away from who you are. But, people that know you, and then people who actually get to know you, they'll see that, they'll be able to distinguish right down the road, like, what's what with it.
Can I just jump in real quick?
Yeah.
Sorry, Chance. Nick, I got to say that when I first saw you on Instagram, like, my very first glance, within a second, as we do, I was already categorizing you. Like, I saw the tattoos, I saw the physique, I saw the blood all over you, and I thought, man, this guy looks like he's a rough package. And so I wasn't sure about you. Like, I wasn't sure which side of the force you were on initially. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, like, the visual perception of you in a flash, bam, making quick assessments, I wasn't sure. And so, to your point, yeah, perception is everything. And the vibe we give off is the vibe that we give off. But that first glance, that I saw, I wasn't accurate with my glance. I built out a quick avatar, as we have to do, and then I had to observe you for a little bit. And by a little bit, it doesn't matter how long, because time isn't that important in this equation. I had to observe you for a little bit to really kind of see you for who you are. When I saw what I saw, then I liked what I liked. But that initial glance, I'm not saying it wasn't doing you any favors, because it wasn't good or bad or whatever. I was just like, what's this all about? And I think that that's the first reaction probably for a lot of people with you. That initial perception is, what the heck is going on with this dude? But it takes time. It takes time to get to know a person's heart. It takes time to see their soul. It takes time to see the person rather than just the shell. And so I'm not apologizing for what I saw initially, because my reaction was my reaction, but it took me a bit of time to see you for who you are. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely.
To that point, though, I think this is the key in that, is that the time it takes to learn who somebody is important, right? If I just met my wife, now her and I think would get along very much differently than when we first met years ago, based on the fact that she knows me now. She knows who I am at my soul rather than just my outward personification. And to the point of Nick and the images that are on his Instagram, those are snapshots of periods of time that most people only see those snapshots of time, right? If somebody goes and watches a fight, that's all they're going to see of you. You're going to get in the cage, you're going to smash somebody's face. Cool. That guy's a savage. Done. That's the image that comes into their head. It's not until they get to know you later that they see deeper within. And there's an image that goes around the internet around Remembrance Day, and it's, excuse me, it's a couple walking in a park on a platform, and it's held up by a bunch of World War I soldiers, and there's like blood all over the ground. And it's a beautiful image. I'm going to see if I can find it. But the point being is that it's surface level. The beauty and all the awesomeness is surface level, but the violence that it takes to get there is often trodden upon. Seb, you got any thoughts on anything we're going over?
Yeah. If you live in a utopian world, or if you've never been exposed to it, or if you've never had to fight for it, or if somehow you were fortunate enough to have other people do that on your behalf, it's kind of like being a vegan or eating steak and not wanting to hunt because you don't agree with it. You know, it essentially sort of exemplify a very similar pattern. You know, there's a few things I want to talk about. You know, when you describing what Nick is about and where we're looking at, or the perception of it, when we're looking at people around us, you know, the sheep and the wolf, the sheep wolf and the wolf look the same. They have four legs, they have teeth, they have capacity for violence, they have all of these things. But what is the difference? The intentionality in regards to the flock, what it is that they intend to do, you know, and that changes everything. And that's where that balance comes into question. In order for you to use violence in a way that's conducive to serve the collective or yourself, or in a way that's quote unquote righteous, there needs to be a lot of good there. Because if there isn't, then what's the point in you even doing that? You know, and I would go so far as to say that even being in an MMA world, if you are an entertainer, for example, and it goes beyond just what you do, you're entertaining. We could extend that to this also. Like if you feel like entertaining people, like being there, and if you're doing it for that reason, I'm not talking about the people that go in there because if not, they'd be in jail, you know, because those guys are around also. But let's even talk about those guys. If they did it because they know that if they didn't channel it in a certain way, they'd be in jail, then they are doing a service to the collective by doing it, you know, because otherwise we'd be dealing with them in a different way. So it's almost a form of self-regulation of sort. And I find it really fascinating. You know, for me, I know that one of the things throughout my life, first of all, when I was first exposed to violence at a very young age, violence especially, you know, perpetrated either towards me or people I loved, there is a loss of innocence there. And then there's a loss of who you were at the time in order to grow into what you need to become so that you can survive these encounters moving forward. And so you know, not all is lost, a lot is transformed, but a little part of you is lost. But I will say this: the majority of the guys on this panel, all of us have led some sort of life of service. I think I probably speak on behalf of everybody if I said that if you were asked to use controlled violence in a professional setting and did so and accidentally, ended up delivering it against the wrong persons, you are very likely to not have a great time moving forward. You're very likely to have a struggle moving forward and I think that for me, it was very, very clear for me. And that what it does is it increases the amount of responsibility that you have with the powers that you have. So it's not just about having the capacity and the ability to engage in controlled violence on account of what you may be asked to do, but it's also to understand that there is a responsibility that comes along with that. That if you cross that line, you have to live with yourself. You have to look in the mirror and you have to be comfortable with that. And that is something that most people that are using violence as a vehicle, either to protect the collective or whatever the case may be, are often, in a position that if they accidentally did something, they don't have the heart for it necessarily, right? Like something wrong, something nefarious, not nefarious in intent, but something that happens that creates repercussion. And it was accidental is what I'm trying to say here, And so I think that there's a quote that says something along the lines of, you don't know how much violence I needed to be exposed to be this gentle, and that's an absolute truth. And I mean, it speaks to balance. It speaks to darkness. There is no darkness without light. There is no light without darkness. So you can't completely obliterate it, because otherwise you take light for granted and eventually it becomes meaningless. And so, my brain goes in a million different directions, but I really think that to wrap this up, for me, years of being in that world has also sort of taken a bit of my violence threshold away, if that makes any sense. So I'm still very capable of it. I'm still understanding when it's needed. I'm still capable of delivering it, all of those things, although slightly reduced capacity on account of being a gimp. But I think what's important for me now is seeking peace, is to try to surround myself in an environment where peace is more likely than violence. And if it does happen, then I'm still capable of it. But I think that I'd be lying if I said that not a little piece of me was taken away over the years, engaging in all of the things that I engaged in. And in fact, Nick and I had this conversation, a couple of days ago, as in there may be a part of your life. This is critical to the task, critical to the mission, but just remember that at some point, things are going to change ever so slightly.
Well, let me ask you a question on that. So I wonder, and this is just off the top of my head here, do you think that the search now for peace, those, especially, I don't mean specifically you, Seb, but like this I see this with a lot of warriors, is they go and they do the job, they engage in violence quite a bit, they have a very good understanding of how to check their own aggression and the way in which they use their violence, and they seek peace? Or do you think perhaps they're seeking what was lost? Do you think they're seeking the level of innocence or naivety? I don't really want to use those words, but I think you guys know what I'm talking about. That piece of you that was lost when you engaged in the world, do you think that you're going back to seek it now rather than seeking peace? What do you guys think? Seb, I'm going to come right back to you.
Yeah, I guess it depends. I mean, I'm very much at peace with what I had to do in the course of the years that I spent in that world. I don't think that there is. I think that what's important is of course intentions and circumstances. And so I never engaged in the gray zones. I never really engaged in violence unless violence was absolutely and unequivocally necessary. And as a result of that, I actually do pretty good with myself in terms of carrying it on my shoulders and having done what I had to do. And it's pretty easy to override any sort of negative emotions associated with that. But in fact, I don't even get negative emotions about that. It's more about I've done my piece. There's other people out there now that have taken over. There's other people that can take over, that should take over to do very difficult things that some of us have engaged in. But there is a cost to it, especially moving forward and sort of aging and everything. I know for me there has been. I'm not saying there is for everybody on the panel, but I know for me there has been. And I think I'm not trying to recover what I lost, but it's more I'm trying to make the landscape ahead sort of as peaceful as it can be, so that I can actually dabble in or not dabble, engage wholeheartedly in other things that are more in line with wellness, because let's call a spade a spade. It is a sacrifice for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Pat, I called you Pac. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I don't think that we're trying to regain anything. Like for me personally, anyways, like I'm not trying to regain that, but again, I'll go back to that contrast and that whole understanding of the difference between violence and peace. Peace becomes so much more relevant after you've had to engage in violence, and that also creates even more respect for those that either have done it before you or taking the torch from you, going into the future, right? And I think that's one of the reasons that we have so much internal passion about things like Remembrance Day, because we understand what people had to do and the violence that had to occur and the lives that they had to live in order to gain that peace. Because peace is great. I think that there's so many people though that just think that it's and I won't say that, go down that rabbit hole too far of, that freedom is like free, right? Freedom's free and peace should just happen. It doesn't. There's bad people, there's people trying to take it from you. Doesn't matter if it's at like a lower society level of someone trying to mug you to the point of like another faction trying to disrupt your world or government or country. And because we've lived it, we just have a better understanding of what peace is. Like I think we do. Like I think we have a very internal deep understanding of what peace brings and what it should feel like, no different than sleeping out in the woods for friggin' or in the desert for friggin' 3 weeks, right? And then you get to sleep on a cot and then you get to sleep in a bed. That transition of what that contrast is. And so I just feel that you're not trying to gain it, like regain something that you had before, because you were blind to it before. You didn't really know what peace was. You didn't know what that felt like. And now you know what it feels like, and you'd like to see it move forward. And so, yeah, and then it creates a bigger respect for those that do violence on your behalf.
I couldn't agree more. There's nothing quite like the feeling of porcelain. Your first feeling of porcelain after a while. Like that's a big one. Nick, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, just kind of extending on like what Pat was just saying, especially I'd say like probably 98% of society doesn't even understand, just how lucky they are to lay in a bed, right? And all of us have been in that circumstance of, sleeping in a trench, sleeping in the mud or on solid ground, right? With just a ground sheet, and the luxury it feels when you go and you do the things for a while, and then you get to actually just go back and lay in a cot or a bed. That first moment when you lay down of peace, that like it takes a whole new meaning to it, right? Where it's just like, I forgot what this was like, right? And the things we take for granted daily. And that's why I love what I do so much, because when it comes down to it, I like taking away luxury. I like taking away food. I like having to suffer. And it's not that like it's fun, but the glory at the end of the suffering is incredible, right? And a lot of people just aren't willing to take away that peace in order to achieve what they want or to do what they want. And for guys like me, and just anyone who has done this game, like the violence game, they understand, like, you start taking away food and you take away your luxuries and you have to like suffer a little bit. It changes your perception of the world and life, and the things that we naturally get daily. right? And I think more people need to be put into those circumstances, just to get that appreciation. And I truly believe that it would make society stronger as a whole.
Yeah, I agree with that one. And it's what is that? The saying is, for those that have fought for it, freedom has a taste that the protected will never know. I think that has a lot to do with it. Shaun, you got any points on this?
Yeah, I think what we're talking about really is external proxies to help us understand our internal world. So, we've all been referring to it, sleeping on a hard ground on just a ground sheet. Well, frig, that's a luxury. You had a ground sheet? Oh, now you're just on hard ground. Well, frig, it was summertime. Try it in winter. Well, it was
winter. You get
winter.
to sleep?
Yeah, but like, were you in a snowstorm? Yeah, there was a snowstorm. Yeah, but was anyone shooting at you? Well, yeah. Well, was there any asteroids crashing around you? You know what I'm saying? So, like, there's always levels to this nonsense of the external world crashing in on us. And so, how much you've explored the world and how much you've been exposed to will help you understand what is hard and what is not for you. And the more you do it, the better your relationship with what is hard and what is not. And really what we're talking about is the external proxy is hard versus comfort, or hard versus easy. And so you lay on the ground, it sucks. You get on the cot, it rocks. And so those are external comforts. But really what we're doing when we're laying down on that cot and like, oh man, this is so freaking great. In that moment, we're enjoying just a little bit of external peace. But that doesn't change the internal war. The internal war and peace versus external war and peace, or violence and nonviolence within yourself. So a person can lay on the ground for a year, get on a cot and think, wow, this cot is so comfortable. But that may not have changed their internal violence, their internal war, their internal dispute. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't say that all of the external proxies that cause suffering, and I do love my external suffering, they are a bridge. It is a means, it is a tool, if you can view it properly, to start shoring up your internal understanding of violence, of discomfort, of war versus peace. And so it's a two-step process. You can do your homework in the external world. You can do all the hard things. You can do all the violent things. You can freaking stand on your head and spin around 3 times. And if you don't bridge that into your internal world, well, all you're doing is externally suffering without internally growing.
I'm wondering if that perhaps leads into what Seb is seeking right now, is that peace. Is that once you reach a level of external suffering and an external gratification of, I have a love for life because I almost lost mine, or I have a love for a bed because I slept on the ground for a while, that I wonder if that's the exchange, is that you put down the physical sword, but you pick it up internally. And then you start fighting that battle on the inside. Seb, I see you nodding. What do you got?
Well, I think that's probably the natural progression. And I mean, if you look at it historically, even the what's his name now? Come on, Shaun.
Musashi.
Yeah, exactly. Look at Miyamoto Musashi, for example, right? Like, he's not the only one. There's plenty of historical examples of this, of warriors being, engaged into war for their entire life, and at the dawn, or at the end of their life, so to speak, there's a transition that happens there that seems to be transitioning into a very sort of peaceful and philosophical world, aiming at exploring another side. And this, at the end of the day, it speaks to balance. And I think whether or not we don't engage in a balanced way in life, willfully or consciously, or cognitively, it's still going to come after us, because we need balance. There needs to be some amount of cosmic neutrality. There needs to be, you know, and if you, the yin and yang, essentially, I mean, this is what the whole concept is about. And I think that when you're engage wholeheartedly in the one side and you're completely discounting the other side, it's going to have catastrophic consequences unless you start doing that. But inherently, generally, what happens is that you start craving that. You know, sometimes if you crave vitamin C, you might feel like eating an orange randomly for no reason. You know, if you crave whatever the case may be, iron, you might feel like eating a steak. Like, there's a reason. Like, we are built like that. We are survival machines, and we are machines that are a lot more complex than we give it credit for. But at the end of the day, we are made for balance. And so you're absolutely right. And I think that that's an incredible point that Shaun was making there. And I think that where the traps are, and we've spoken about this before, is to continue engaging in life in the exact same way, because that's how you did it, negating the work that needs to be done internally. So despite how righteous the pursuit might be and how beneficial the pursuit might have been in terms of gaining perspective, that's given you an incredible perspective on life and made you grateful, because essentially that's what it comes down to. You know, when you have enough perspective, gratitude comes in, and when gratitude comes in, the sky is the limit as far as getting, you know, a payback or a return on investment on this engagement and this journey called life. But the risk is, and I see it, and we've spoken about this in the green room last time, I believe, you know, guys that leave a certain world behind, that have done something for many, many years, and eventually they just can't let it go, because it becomes a defining factor. It becomes an identity. It becomes something that's so wrapped up into them that they can no longer see themselves do anything differently. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of guys struggling to transition, struggling to do something else, struggling to find themselves, struggling to explore. And I think that, you know, I don't think it could have been put any better as far as I'm concerned. That is a critical piece, and you need to understand that there is a timeline on this, and what is the balance, or what is the offside of that looking like?
You know, I was watching a little video actually a couple days ago, and it was a gentleman explaining that it's not so much yin and yang. It is yin yang. It is one piece. It is not two separate pieces of a whole. It is one continual thing. And I think that's a fantastic point. Nick, you got any points on this?
Yep. Seven, I actually kind of had a conversation about this a couple days ago, and about the timeline, and you know, going back to like the entire subject that we're talking about, the cost of violence. Well, for instance, with my sport, there is a timeline, right? And there is damage in what I'm doing to my brain and to my body and everything else, the weight cuts, the brain trauma, everything else. There is a timeline. And a lot of guys get caught up in there are warriors that just want to die on their shield, like wholeheartedly. And I know some of them. I train with some of them. There's guys that will literally fight till they die, and they just want to be a MMA fighter or a fighter till they die. And that's incredible. But it goes back to, that yin and yang factor, right? Where it's like, there has to be a balance of peace in there as well, incorporated with that, you know, the violence. And Seven, I've talked about this as well. It's, imagine, right? Like, if, for instance, most of you guys on this panel have done room clearing and done some crazy shit. When you guys go and you do these entries, it's immediate. You don't have to, like, it's reactionary. Seven, I've talked about this, where, for instance, an MMA fighter, you're setting a timeline of 2 months, and 2 months ahead, you're willingly going to walk into a cage with someone who wants to kill you and do extreme violence to you. Yeah, there's a ref, but if you get hit wrong, you might get some serious damage. Guys have died in the cage. There's been lots of crazy shit that happens in the sport. That acceptance for 2 months is very draining. So even just touching on like the yin and yang factor, yin yang factor. If I was constantly thinking about it and constantly living in that realm of violence and that aggression, just thinking about the fight, and just, I would drain myself of all my energy daily for 2 months. I would suck the life right out of me. There's a time and place where you have to think about it, go do your controlled violence, and then come out of it and find peace. You have to, whatever it might be. Everyone has different, tactics for finding that peace and that balance aspect in their, in their day to day. But, for me, it could be walking my dog. It could be just go sitting by the river and listening to the stream, right? But there is a timeline, and, like just even how Seb has spoken about it today, there does come a time where you're still capable of what your violence and your abilities, but there is that desire for peace, regardless if you are an actively violent, like pro MMA fighter or even military, right? Like, we do need to have that day-to-day balance, because if you're constantly fighting, and not just fighting like in a realistic standpoint, but if you're just constantly fighting your brain and you're constantly fighting your body, eventually there is serious repercussion, right? And it could be health issues, for instance, right? Or things like that. And those are very realistic things. And people do not appreciate that until they're faced with it. My situation, at the end of 2021, like when I found my tumor, I told the doctor, no, like I'm fighting in December, and I'm going to do the fight. And then after the fight, we'll take the lump out, because we didn't know what it was exactly yet. I look back at that now and I'm like, that could have had catastrophic repercussion. If, who knows, right? Days, weeks went by and I delayed it, it could have cost me my life. So there is like a fine balance where we have to like distinguish when it's time to be violent and it's time to find that peace and that aspect where we just settle into our life and just be okay with not being violent, I guess. So.
Yeah, 100%. You made me think. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's an American infantry veteran. He actually fought in the same areas of Afghanistan that I was in, but like 6 years separate. And he was chatting. He was like, man, you Canadians, when you get to war, are like absolute brutal savages. But when you're at home, you guys are the nicest people in the world. Why? Where does that change happen? And I'm like, oh, well, you don't know. There's actually a ceremony where we take all of our anger and hate and we put it into the Canadian goose up until we need it. And then we go to war and we bring it home. But I think it's an interesting point in the fact of like, we have this natural, and I say this as Canadians because we're all Canadian here, but part of our society growing up is to be, kind to one another for the most part. And at the same time, we have a history of extreme violence when we go to war. And I think it's an interesting shift that we almost seem to have. I can't say inherently, but it seems to be inherent. Most Canadians I know have the ability to just like turn it on. Pat, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Well, I'll go back to balance quickly to start off, because I think I think if you are living your human experience to the maximum, you are seeking balance. And like even biologically, as like the body's always seeking homeostasis, right? It always wants to seek balance. And I think that if you bring that, I think part of the whole human experience is that you mentally, emotionally, and spiritually are always striving for balance. If you don't, then you're missing out on life, I think. And so to accept that and to open that up, and to not allow blind machoism to stop that. You know what I mean? Because I think some of us have been guilty of that. I know even in my youth, I've been guilty of that. A blind machoism, like, oh, I don't need to feel that. I don't need to fucking, you know what I mean? I don't have to explore those things. But it's a great part of the human experience, you know? And so I think balance is an important part to bring into this whole conversation. I think it was great listening to everybody talk about it, because I think that, you know, as you know, warriors seeking peace, I think that's just all about that balance, you know? So
Shaun, what are you thinking right now? I could see the gears turning.
I know, because honestly, everyone's cracking it out of the park. So now what? Okay, we've got it all figured out. I'm going to throw this out. Let's see where it goes. So, you know, the warrior who comes back on his shield, it's a noble thing. It's a time immemorial head nod recognition of that guy just freaking rocked. I mean, we can write books about it more. We can elaborate on that moment more through many novels, through many movies, through many, you know, conversations. But essentially what's happening when a warrior comes back on his shield, everyone knows what's up. They get the nod. However, I think that some warriors don't understand that there's a moment before that. And that moment is the lost opportunity of that warrior not coming back on their shield and delivering some freaking wisdom to their clan that they're going back to their society that they're going back to their family that they're going back to their friends that they're going back to the upcoming generation that is about to go grab a shield. Like, you can go freaking hard right to the end and come back on a shield. But if you have the opportunity to go hard as you can and then come back not on a shield to deliver some wisdom, I'm just going to throw that out there. Let's see where it goes.
I got a thought on this right off the bat, and it goes in line with the title of the show, The Cost of Violence. And I think that the experience that is lost is the cost of violence. Is that there's going to be people that have wisdom, that have information to bring to the rest of us, that is lost due to violence. And that warrior that's coming back on the shield, like you said, Shaun, we all get the head nod. And yeah, absolutely, their sacrifice is worthy. But everything that person had is now lost to time. We don't get to benefit from that experience anymore. And that's my initial thought on it. Pat, I'm going to come to you now. What do you got?
sorry, I didn't mute there. Yeah, no, it's interesting because I was just trying to find it quickly on the Googles there, so I'll have to badly paraphrase it, but I think it was Epictetus that basically, like, he talks about, you know, being in battle and leaving a sword behind. You can find another, or not a sword, but a shield. You can find another shield. And if we didn't have, you know, like that mentality, like, I'm not saying like deserting or cowardice is the answer here, but it was just an example of time in those times where he was like, yeah, we're all going to get decimated here, so I'm going to bounce so I can fight again and get another shield here. And that's an interesting spot too, right? Because like, some of us have that extreme, you know, hold the line kind of mentality. That's what we're taught. That's how we kind of train. But it was just interesting seeing that quote, and it was a while ago that I seen it. We wouldn't have his knowledge or his philosophy if he didn't have that cognition, right?
Seb, what are you thinking?
Yeah, lots of good stuff. I was thinking when Shaun was talking about, you know, the warrior coming back on his shield, you know, if the warrior is in his shield bearing days, that's noble. But if the warrior has kept himself at war for a gazillion years so as to not engage in anything else, and we know that there is a cost associated with those types of sacrifices, there is a cost. There's a personal cost. There's a relationship cost. There's all these other things. So you're affecting things, right? So I like the concept of temporary obsession. You want to be really good at something and make a massive difference for a very meaningful amount of time. Once it becomes about you, it's no longer about the sacrifice, it's now you cannot get yourself out of there. So for me, the guy that wants to die on his shield and this is all he knows and all of this stuff, well, he hasn't grown. Like, he's been here, and what are we here for, really? If not for growth? I mean, you tell me, because we're going to work, we're paying bills. Like, what is the actual point of this operation? I think there has to be something on a cosmic level that has a lot more meaning than that. And that's the problem. You can at face value, you're presenting a certain image, or you're posturing sort of metaphorically, but you end up disengaging from life almost wholeheartedly. And so I think a lot of people do that. And this goes back, it loops right back to what Shaun was talking about earlier about, the internal work and the external proxies and those types of things. It's if you haven't done the work. So ultimately, is there something that I can do that's truly meaningful, that's going to really reveal all my capacity and my ability to deal with life, but also that's going to bring lessons to, the people around me or the next generation or whatever the case may be, so that I can continue growing in that in a different way. And so I do believe that that's a critical piece of the equation. Now, we all know that, some of us at 20, if we're having this conversation with us today, we wouldn't even agree with ourselves. Some of us wouldn't even listen, right? But it's not about the lesson at the time of the lesson. It's about the lesson when you're able to put the wheels to the pavement and remember that there is a lesson. And that then you go back to the information you were provided. It's the same with kids, exactly the same. You're going to be repeating the same thing all over and over again. And yes, you have the impression that they do not understand it. They do not comprehend it. They shut you out when you speak that way. But what happens is eventually it works its way in, because it's been repeated enough, and they've been engaged with this enough that eventually they put the wheels to the pavement through their own experiences in life. And then they go, light bulb moment. This is why my parents X, Y, and Z, right? So it's exactly the same here. There's nothing different about the approach. And so I believe that, as noble as something might be, when is it time to move on to the next phase of the operation, so that you can actually grow and grow others with you? This is not about you. This is not about the individual. It never was. And the reason why we're struggling so much in the world right now is because we're making everything about ourselves. Everybody's acting like an individual. So we carry all of the joy, but unfortunately, we're also carrying all of the pains. This was never meant to be a burden to be carried alone. If you wonder why we have problems with mental illness and all kinds of different things, just think division, individualism. Those are major catalysts in that.
It's actually one of the things we get taught pretty early within the military is you should never be alone, right? You always have a battle buddy. You always have a fire team partner. You always have somebody on your hip so that you can work together to get anything done. I think that's a great point. Nick, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I think Seb actually nailed all the points that I was going to say. So he said it perfectly. I completely agree with everything he said. It's what's the point of the journey if you aren't influencing and you're not helping growth within the people around you or your community or any of it? It's there is no point. It's, and I've personally seen this with like very specific martial artists. You get caught up in the self and not the group, and you see it at the highest level. And these guys, they have like a world of skill set. They're some of the most dangerous people on earth, but they have the like the most vast knowledge of martial arts, whether it's within wrestling, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, kickboxing, boxing. You could sit there and you could just be a sponge and absorb all their information, but because of their like selfish mentality, they don't want to teach any of it. They don't want to pass that knowledge on. And it's like, well, what's the point, right? Like, for instance, I don't always like the Dagestani fighters just because I find wrestling boring. When I fight with that mentality that I would watch my fight going like, that's what a fight should be. It should just be barbaric, and it should be intense, and it should be entertaining. It should be brawl till you fall or get. And however, one thing I love about, for instance, like Habib sits there and he is just passing on all of his knowledge to his fighters, and these guys are becoming incredible. And that's what it's about. That's the journey, right? To do the things, get really good at it, and then have a herd, and you pass on all that knowledge, and then you see that growth. I truly think it is one of the most beautiful gifts that you get to witness in life, is that passing of knowledge. And, one thing I love more than anything is even just my teams that I coach. When I sit there on the edge of the mat sometimes and I watch them spar, or I watch them roll with the adults, and they're choking out grown men, and they're 15 years old or 16-year-old boys that don't even have man strength yet, but they're so technical and they're so sharp because of something I showed them. And then they come over and they just give me a little fist bump. That is more rewarding to me than getting my own hand raised in a cage. Because it's that passing of knowledge, right? Creating sharp warriors, but making sure that they're good people as well, right? They're not egotistical, that they remain on the path, on that same journey. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with that. The one thing I love about teaching, especially, and this is a question I want to put to you all because I saw this quite a bit in the military, was units would not pass their best troops to the schools, which created a cycle of lackluster troops coming into the units, and then they had to be trained up by the guys at the units anyway, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We'd always we wouldn't have the top tier hard chargers, the dudes that really were awesome at the job, teaching the recruits. But I found that teaching, especially jiu-jitsu, it made me better because I had to relay the finer details. I had to better understand what I was teaching. I had to be able to figure out what certain recruits or what students needed from that information versus just reiterating the teaching points that were given to me. Right? I had to become better as a teacher. And now, like, especially in my jiu-jitsu, I'm a much better person on the mats rolling around because I've been teaching for the last however many months now. And I think that's a beautiful point. Shaun, you got any thoughts?
Well, you do have to become a better teacher, but you've also got to become a better student. So it ain't the teacher's fault. It's the student's fault. And from the student's perspective, it ain't their fault. It's the teacher's fault. So I'm going to use an example here. We've been talking about passing on wisdom, and, Pat came to mind during this point. Because on the last podcast that we're on when we started off this topic, just a random moment in the podcast. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't so impactful to probably the listening audience that it probably slid by. But I freaking picked it up, and I haven't been able to let it out of my head ever since. It was just a simple thing that Pat said. And it was in reference to stress inoculation training, or SIT. And what Pat had said is the level of stress that we're inoculated in Tier 1 Special Operations, or JTF2, it's hard to understand. And so, we both kind of locked eyes and kind of gave a little, knowing nod. And you'll never understand the level of stress inoculation that we're talking about unless you're in that freaking game. So, what's my point? This is my point. If I wasn't a good student in the podcast in that moment, I wouldn't have heard what Pat said. I wouldn't have taken it for what it is. I was listening intently enough that no matter what the reason that Pat was saying what he was saying, I allowed my open mind to take it in a different direction after the podcast. And that is why I've got a sheet here that is talking about neural network programming. Because Pat's stress inoculation training made me think about what is the difference. This is the question that I started working on with the robots. What is the difference between a tier 1 special operator and a typical person that gets exposed to high levels of stress inoculation versus elementary levels of stress? And there is some remarkable differences on what it does to the human physiology, the human neural pathways, and how, for lack of a better term, a lack of permanence versus a almost permanent imprint based on the intensity of the stress inoculation. And so I'd started thinking about that on Wednesday immediately as soon as Pat said it. I started my research immediately after the podcast. Thursday morning, as everyone knows who knows anything about me, it's freaking garbage day, man. Thursday garbage day here in Roslyn. So I dragged out all of my garbage, put it on the sidewalk, and started walking back to the garage as I do. And I've been filming Thursday garbage day for over a year now. I've got maybe heading towards 100 garbage days, but they're all on stories. They've all been deleted, and I don't have any of those videos. So I shoot, put it up, dump, and carry on with my day. But on Thursday, as I was walking back from the garbage cans, I thought in my head, I hadn't really figured out what I was going to do. As I was walking to the camera, I thought, hey, I'll just recreate that moment back on the Mattawa Plains where I did a spinning crescent kick the 9mm Browning out of my buddy's hand, and then freaking gave it to him. And so that's what I did. I walked towards the camera, did my thing, turned around. And the moment that I started turning around, I then started visualizing somebody bumping a Browning high power in the back of my head. Like I felt it in my mind. I created the construct of the violent moment. The moment that I felt the pistol touch the back of my head, I just did what I did. And I had no intention of drawing a 9mm off my hip, a covert carry, like I would have done like on the teams. I didn't plan that. It just occurred. I didn't see me like really doing the draw until I reviewed the video as I was about to put it up on the Instawebs. And I thought, holy hell, where did that come from? Like I hadn't intended to do it. It wasn't like a showboat moment where I wanted to display Jason Bourne nonsense. It just happened, we'll call it. And so that was neural network programming. When I saw that, I was like, holy cronkamole. I gotta really sink into this idea of neural network programming. I've really got to connect the dots between what Pat said and all of my experiences throughout my life. I want to crystallize it starting today. And if Pat hadn't have just slid that sentence in about stress inoculation training casually, adding wisdom to my life casually, it wasn't a big deal. Like I'd be so much poorer for it. And so if I hadn't have like been a good student and then afterwards done my frickin' homework and then afterwards created a product that I can now talk about to other people, we'd all be poorer for it. And so, Pat, thanks, of course, for just casually dropping something that at the time seemed perhaps unimportant. But that's the way of the world, man. That's the way of life. If you're a good student, everything has value. It's what you do with it, or whether you even recognize that you have that ability. So I'll wrap it up, my freaking long monologue. It ain't on the teacher always, but it's always on the student.
Pat, got any thoughts?
No, I love that. That's I was going to go a different direction, but after Shaun's talk there, I will go on to the more the student thing, because it's so interesting, the gifts that our world of violence or the military or however you want to look at it can be applied now to real life. I think just really elevates the human experience. You could even take another concept, right, like the OODA loop, right, which was developed by a fighter pilot. That can be applied to so many parts of your life. It's almost exponential, but it was created out of combat. It was created out of violence, right? And if you don't know what the OODA loop is, right, like that's like basically in a dogfight situation, and we were talking about that I think before the show. I don't think we talked about it since we've been recording, but we were talking about how many seconds it takes and how you've already preconceived a answer or outcome. And this was almost a system to, I guess, not override it, but to confirm it, right? So in a dogfight, like the whole idea was like to observe what's happening, orientate the aircraft, decide what you're doing, and then act on it, right? But you can apply that formula to so many other things. And there's a Delta operator. He's gone into a bunch of speeches about it. I forget how many degrees he's gotten since he got out of the military, but he's applied that in so many other areas, like in business and school and all these things. And without some of these, I guess, situations that we get exposed to in violence and in combat and war and the military, there's so many tools that are brought forward to enhance our human experience afterward.
Man, you guys are just like cracking it out of the park. I love this. Seb, you got any points to add to this?
Yeah, man, the list goes on and on. I mean, I use PI every day for normal decision making, and that's priorities of life or priorities of task, intelligence, and environment. What's changed, what now? So if I have a decision to make on two things that are seemingly conflictual, and I have to give my time to one of them over the other one, how am I going to do that? There's a process to do that in a chaotic world where we can use those tools to make the right decision when the two decisions that you are making are wrong, but one of them is just ever so slightly better than the other based on the totality of the circumstances. And the list goes on and on. There's so many things that we could be, maybe for another show, get on and have conversations about. But, let's take the Boyd or Dort. I can't remember what his name was. Boyd, I think, right? The OODA loop.
Boyd?
John Boyd.
Yeah. So and it's interesting because, and so you have guys and this is a total segue, but it's important to know there are guys at the academic levels that are disputing some of these concepts that have never actually been in the chair, right? The concept of stress inoculation is highly disputed. It was a thing that we took for granted for many, many years, and anecdotally, it does work. There is no question that that's the case. But some academic somewhere comes out, never set foot in an environment where this was required, and they do an external analysis on some of these concepts, and they're coming up with, you can't really be inoculated. It's not an inoculation per se. That's the wrong choice of word. We start talking about semantics and all this stuff. The reason why I'm saying this is because, as Shaun alludes to all the time, and I think we've both been banging that drum for a long time now, you need to get out there and engage in that world. You need to get out there and engage in life. Like, I don't care if you stay on the sideline and you do your research. You've never done anything. I had a guy last week, and I'm going on a milk rice here, but that's okay. Bear with me for a second. I posted something about fasting, intermittent fasting. And of course, there's always disputed evidence. There's always all kinds of things, but I've done a lot of it is there certain things that are helping me? Certainly it does. There's no question that's the case. And having somebody that goes from sort of side to side as a little bird or a little good idea fairy, jumping on people's into people's throat, at people's throat, because they're posting about, intermittent fasting and the evidence is questionable and all of these things. And we have a conversation and I'm like, hey man, have you ever done it? And the answer is no. I've never tried it. So you've been bouncing from guys to guys trying to find out if it works, but you've actually never done it. Do you realize that in order for them to ascertain a certain concept, there needs to be a baseline? On that baseline, there's going to be outliers. If you're an outlier and that works and applies for you, that whole concept of data collection on a baseline type academic level is going to cheat you out of an experience that could be better for you. Like, stop reading and doing all of the things that you do except engaging in the event. It was the exact same when we were talking about either violence or working out or whatever the case may be. These armchair quarterbacks that are watching everybody else step up on account of the collective and providing expert opinion on what they would have done when they saw red and or how professionally they would have handled certain things. Man, you're an armchair quarterback and you can't live life like this. You are watching everybody else live their life and wasting your time, And so I don't know why this came to mind for me, but man, go out there, do something, try something, try something. It ain't going to be perfect. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe it works. Maybe you surprise yourself, or maybe you're able to discount it with a measure of certainty because you've actually done something,
Yeah, there's a big difference between opinion and experience, and I think that's the delineation here, especially for people that don't know. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier about some people who they don't want to get into a world of violence because I think most people know that whenever you learn something new, it's going to be worse before it gets better. Like, you have to, whatever you think is going to happen is not going to happen, and your view on that subject has to be broken down until you can relearn what it is you need to know. And so I always keep that in my head too, is it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think those that experience life understand that going into anything new. So they totally recognize and they're good to go. Okay, yep, it's going to suck for a while, and then I'm going to get better at it, and then it's going to feel more natural. And I think that's a great point. Nick, you got any points on any of this?
There's a lot that I want to say. Going back to kind of what Seb was saying there, it's always the people that have Cheeto dust on their fingers that seem to have the most to say about, especially the world of violence, right? And it's like, until you actually go out there and you try something, you have no idea the reality of what it actually takes to do something. And just from living a day-to-day life in a MMA gym, you see it daily, right? You see the people coming in and out, the new guys, the old guys. And one thing I always see, especially with the older guys, right? You can sharpen your sword as much as you want, right? And you're going to have a very sharp sword. But if you put that sword down for a certain amount of time, it's going to rust. It's going to get dull, right? You have a nice sword. It still looks good. The sword's the sword, but it will get dull if you don't keep sharpening it and if you don't take care of it, right? And it's through and through. You just, even when we stop pursuing, I guess, because I want to keep bringing it back to the violence, because like that's our topic today. When you stop pursuing violence, then your weapons get dull, right? You need to keep them sharp, and one thing, like, I admire the hell out of Shaun is, everyone's like, just like, probably like, oh, he's just out there kicking sticks in the forest. It's like, no, he's keeping those spears sharp. That's all he's doing, right? And it's simple as just kicking a stick in the forest. But like, as long as you're practicing, as long as you're doing the things, then, you know, that's consistent growth. And, you know, it's easy for people to just be a quarterback, right, on the chair and just sit there and say what they want to say. But, you know, until someone grabs a hold of you, especially someone that's good at martial arts or good at just fighting or violence, you have no idea what that realm is like.
Yeah, and not only that, the speed at which violence happens. A
Yeah.
lot of times people don't understand how quickly it'll happen, and how quickly you forget everything you know the moment that first punch hits you in the face, and then you're like, "What do I got to do now?" Oh, geez.
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful point. Now, we have been going for a little bit over an hour now, and I think this gives us a nice even plane to wrap it up. We obviously could
let's
talk
keep
about
rocking.
no. Okay,
Let's
what do you
keep
got?
rocking.
What do you
Yeah,
got, Sean?
come on. We're on a roll.
Hit
We're
it.
on a roll.
What do you got?
Let's take it for a little bit longer if the boys can hang in there. So something that we've been talking about is depth and breadth, or how wide you experience life and how deep you explore life. And so if you don't have any breadth, if you don't have any width, or if you don't have an extended bandwidth of life, if you have a very narrow life, you haven't traveled the world, you haven't been exposed to a bunch of things, you haven't heard conversations like this before, that's breadth. If you haven't ever considered the OODA loop at a deeper level, like this book, which is a scientific exploration of a single dude called John Boyd and his OODA loop. And so how much you want to experience life and how deep you want to experience life is the chart that you have to evaluate your life against. So you can dabble in a ton of things. That's breadth, but that's dabbling. Dabbling is helpful to understand the left and right of arc, but to be effective in your left and right of arc, you've got to have depth. So I've got lots of little rules of thumb in my head. I've got lots of little mantras. I've got lots of little quotes that, like, I've learned over my life to be useful to Shaun. And so violence doesn't just come out of the violence game. I have a violent quote in my head that I learned when I was a computer system engineer. And it's going to sound non-violent, but I'm just going to throw it out there and play with it for a sec. If this, then that. That is a thing that you have to understand as a computer system network engineer. If this, then that. And really what that's referring to is a branching point where if you go this way, then that occurs. If you go this way, then that occurs. If this, then that. It's just a computer phrase. Now, what you do with that in your head is what creates the results. So when I look at a problem in front of me on the single track, some guy giving me attitude, I'm online working hard on something and I want to create, wait for it, a violence of action for an outcome. I just think this, if this, then that. That doesn't sound very violent. It doesn't sound very aggressive, but it is in my head when I use it. So a computer system engineer can throw out if this, then that, if this, then that, and it can be daffodils in the background in their mind. But in my mind, when I'm dropping if this, then that, it's got a whole different meaning. It's got a whole different, maybe, intensity. And so a computer system engineer who's lived a standard issue life won't be able to apply their past experiences of being a special operator, which is what I do. I overlay all of my life experiences into simple phrases like, if this, then that, because that's what gives that phrase depth. All of the breadth in the world is almost superfluous unless you can add some depth to the phrase. Once you start adding depth, well, simple phrases just initiate a whole different sequence of events in your life. Let's see where that goes.
You made me start getting mathematical in my head. It made me think of a three-dimensional aspect versus a two-dimensional aspect. And we're talking earlier about perspective and how other people's perspective will change based on how you hold yourself and how you move through life and all these things. But I was thinking about a bandwidth. If you look at a bandwidth as a two-dimensional aspect, you're just going to see the highs and lows, the troughs and valleys, all over the place. But if you look at it in a three-dimension, it's a circle. And I think that this goes back to the whole yin-yang thing, but the concept of depth and breadth gives us a holistic view of life. Whereas I think a lot of people spend time looking at, especially armchair quarterbacks, they look at it from a perspective of two dimensions, of just the single bandwidth. You should have done this versus this or this or this. Whereas the people that have actual experience, depth in a subject, are going to see it as a holistic aspect of all the things that are going on rather than just a two-dimensional view of them. That's my thought on it, at least. Pat, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, there's some really good conversation here, and I'm definitely going to steal Nick's Cheeto dust saying there for sure. But also the fact that, we titled this podcast as The Cost of Violence. And what we're showing, I think, especially in the second half, for the most part, is the rewards of violence, not the rewards of like beating a person down or creating that destruction or that battlefield sense of a reward and victory, but the reward of all the things that, because of what we've experienced, we've been able to expand our human existence, right? The acronyms, our strategic thinking, the way that we approach the world based on that violent world that we lived in, I think that it gives us so much more, and it should almost be like the rewards of violence, the treasure of violence, really, of what this podcast is. I feel in the second half for sure.
I can change the title. That's not a problem. Have you got any thoughts on this?
You already did that last week, posted one title and the other. So, sorry, Chance, I had to.
All good, man.
When you, and again, and I'm going to bring that word back because I think people just haven't heard it enough. But to Shaun's point, what does the word say and what do you hear when you hear it are two different things. The problem with human language is that it's human language. So it's very easy to repeat a word over and over again, never questioning the meaning of it, the value that it holds, or the different, the different interpretations of it, or the breakdown of it at the very, very fundamental level. So catastrophic consequences, what Pat was just talking about is people that have spent a lifetime dealing with catastrophic consequences now have the ability to impart wisdom, if I can say that. I mean, I don't mean it in a Marcus Aurelius sense, but I'm impart some wisdom that may help somebody. Let's say that. What is that again? Balance. It's balance again. And so when we're looking at how we conduct ourselves in life, in absolutely any endeavor, I feel like for the longest time, for me anyways, I was underrating the amount of value that balance has in life. I think that I took it as a buzzword, a little like you would do, say, mindfulness or gratitude, if you're not giving it any thought whatsoever. But when you start experiencing gratitude at the level at which your feet hit the ground, and for every breath you take, for every blink, for every sip of cold water that you drink, for anything that you engage in, you are viscerally and wholeheartedly in love with your life because of the concept of gratitude, because of the gratitude that you feel. You'll never hear gratitude the same way ever again, to Shaun's point. So it is very important that we start doing almost like a self-inventory of the things that we have taken for granted, that we already know. Understanding that we probably dabbled in them and we really don't know them. And so is there some sort of inventory that I can conduct with my own life in the conversations that I have with people and really start looking at concepts in a much deeper fashion so that I can reap benefits that I never before considered? I think that is the concept of growth through life. You can use the same word 9 gazillion times, but by the time you're on your deathbed, it should have a lot more meaning, because along the way, you've added to the layers of understanding. It's almost like an elevated level of consciousness, so to speak, but in a non-elitist way, just in an engagement way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I like it. I'm thinking that it's a good question to ask yourself is, do I truly know, or do I just have an idea of something? And I mean, Shaun, we did this the conversation with Satch a little while ago about ideas and the good idea fairy and all that stuff, is that there's a lot of people that have an idea. They have a very, very, as you're saying, breadth versus depth, but they have a very thin view or knowledge about a certain subject, but the idea that they have is they're well versed in it, but they really don't know. And I think the more we ask ourselves if we actually truly know something about a subject, it will lead us to say, not really, I'm going to dig deeper. And that will bring us consistently forward if we keep asking ourselves that. Nick, you got any thoughts?
Yep. Just jumping back to what Shaun said, in the holistic nature of things, right? So, and going back to depth as well. So, back, there's been multiple things said. I've just been spinning through my head. This conversation is incredible, but when it comes back to like the depth and the holistic nature of things, like for instance, we were talking about like the Cheeto dust quarterbacks on the armchair, right? People do not understand the holistic nature of certain things, like especially, not just military, not just like special forces. When it comes to martial arts, just as like a pro MMA fighter, for me, and this is my realm of thought and how I live daily. Everything I do, I look at a standpoint to like incredible depth. So the water I drink is filtered through a Berkey filter system. I don't drink anything other than that water is Berkey. The food I eat is cooked by High Q Foods here in Lethbridge. It's cooked. There's not a single ounce of bad food going into my body during a fight camp. The sleep that I get, I maximize sleep at night, and I make sure I can sleep during the day too. And I prioritize that over relationships, and that's where the sacrifice, and this goes back to the cost of violence. You have to sacrifice relationships. You have to sacrifice time. You have to sacrifice the things you enjoy, sugars, all the things, the luxuries that we get in life, in order to do something like extreme violence and be good at it. Because if you're not doing that and you look back and let's say you lose a fight, and even if you had a great battle and this like A, B, C, and D, it was great, everything was good, but you still lost, you might look back and be like, well, the water I drank wasn't good, or this or that, and you just play these games in your head. You have to. It goes. One of my favorite quotes is "Mind of a stoic, body of an athlete, heart of a warrior." Right? You everything you do in a day has to be deeply thought about. Right? The conversations you have with people, where you're putting your energy, and people do not understand or appreciate things to those levels. Like, and it just, when it comes to, I call them the keyboard warriors, right? When it comes to these guys that think they know the level of mental fortitude that goes into, something like a fight camp, or, preparing for like an operation overseas, or just anything. It the depth that we go on this, I don't even know how to explain it. It is, until you live it, you don't understand it, right? And you never will.
Yeah, it made me think of a quote I put. It, I can't remember if it was last week or I think it might have been this last Wednesday, where I was saying that a quote from Stalin had said, one death is, or you kill one person, it's murder. You kill 1 million people, it's a statistic. And I think it applies to this because of the fact that anybody can read what happens, right? Like, Shaun does an operation, he could list all of the steps he takes, all of the things he does, and I could sit there and read it and go, yep, totally get it, understood, yep, Raj. But I don't know. I can't know. That work is it's a statistic to me. It's a realm outside of my knowledge. Now I have a general idea because I was in the military. I can kind of run down what he's talking about, but I don't know what it takes. Same thing with Seb, same thing with Pat, same to you, Nick. Like, I have a general idea of what you guys have to go through to do the things that you do every day, but I don't physically know. Similarly, if I was going back to, let's say, explosives, or if I was doing what I'm doing at the jiu-jitsu gym or whatever, you guys don't live my life regardless. So I think even to the extent that, say, Pat and Shaun can share a little nod about stress inoculation, they weren't on the same course. And even if they were, they didn't experience the same things. So we never really know. We can always just have an idea. And that idea can be better than some, but to try to look at somebody else or another experience or a different set of things that have happened, and tried to say, well, that person could have done it better, or that could have been whatever, or this person didn't do it right. You don't really know. You never really know. Shaun, got any thoughts? I can see the gears.
Yes, because I'm going to take it in a different direction now, because I want to throw something back to my Bohemos from back in the day. I want to ensure that any veterans out there hear this message. Hopefully they'll hear this message. If you've been following along and you're picking up what we're putting down, you may be at a point now where you're thinking, well, dang, I never really thought about it too deeply. Dang, I never really sat down and spent a few days thinking about what it means when I was a good student, the things that I did learn, and then flip that on its head and turn it into, how could I be a better teacher? How can I actually teach the people around me right now? And I think, and I'm interested in your opinions, I think there's a bit of a prevailing attitude out there where people will assess their life right now and think, oh man, I didn't do all of those things in the past. I didn't have all of that reflection. I didn't consider all of the things that I've learned and how I can help others. It's too late for that. But today I'm going to start getting better at it. And I disagree. What I'm going to refer to is that every year that you were in the game, it was a harvest that you never harvested. But it's still sitting there. The crop is still there. This crop, every year, all of the years that you didn't reap it, there's still a crop that grew. Every year, maybe you've got 20 crops, 20 years worth of crops that you never reaped, that you never considered deeply enough to then provide to the community around you. And if I can take it as far as every year you plant your wheat, it's still there, man. This is a metaphysical wheat. It doesn't die. And every year you get a new crop of wheat. So however many years you've been ignoring, reaping your crop of wheat and turning it into bread for the masses. I hope you understand what I'm talking about. Anyone who's listening, do not accept the fact that because you haven't been doing the things that we're suggesting, that it's too late. It ain't too late. It's still inside of you. All those crops are in you. You just have to figure out how to reap, sow, and get on with the program for all of those around you. So I'm curious what you guys think.
I think I need to sharpen my scythe. Harvesting for sure. Seb, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I got a few. Les Brown, I believe, said something along the lines of most people die at 35 and they don't get buried until they're 75. That is true. That is true of most people. It's unfortunate. And I think that the prospect of taking something that's truly challenging on when you have let yourself become comfortable is a terrifying prospect. But the problem is you will not realize the cost of it until it's too late to do anything about it. And so it's a very insidious thing because it doesn't feel that bad. It would be like saying, if I gave somebody that eats fast food every day for their entire life, and I had an opportunity to give them the best and most delicious, nutritious meal they ever had, but they never had one, there's nothing to reference against. What is to stop them to continue doing exactly what they're doing? There is no incentive because there's no knowledge of what they're missing. The problem when you're engaged in life in a certain way is that when you realize this, you will be on your deathbed. And now there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. Now the time is gone, you know? I also think that most people have and we're negatively biased for a reason. That's all tied into survival. But I think that humans forget that. And we're very negatively biased when it comes to death and the time that we have left and all of those things. It's like, listen, man, if a kid is 7 and in the next 2 years they'll be developing some sort of rare vicious cancer and you're 82 but you'll live to be 96, which one of you is old? Like this is going against what we like as humans. Simple boxes where we can oversimplify everything and engage in life in a very simplistic way. The problem with that is the cost of it. And the cost of it, you won't know until it's too late. So you have to be taking your wisdom from somewhere. You have to be hearing these things. You have to be seeking them. And then you have to be proliferating them. So others, including the people the closest to you, that you know you can help optimize their life on account of what it is that you discovered, are things that could be extremely beneficial. I think that we discounted because we just don't know what we've lost until it's too late. And then we have these sob stories of conversation we tell ourselves on our deathbed, and it doesn't do any good to anybody because it's too late. Okay. So and unless you are dead and your heart has stopped beating, you're in the game if you want to be. That is a choice. It's not an accident. It's a choice. It's a decision. One more thing I would like to add very quickly is in relation to what Nick was saying earlier. So as a fighter, as a pro fighter, there's all these aspects and all these different contexts and things that you need to be developing so that you're able to optimize your performance. Life is no different. But imagine this. How many people knew nothing about cancer research, cancer treatment, or preemptive action to prevent cancer until they got cancer? And now they know it all. But the problem is, now it's late. It's not to say that the battle is necessarily lost. Maybe they saved their life with the information they've gained. The fact is, you may not get to that kind of depth necessarily. But imagine if you went below surface level, so below dabbling, just enough that you could help yourself and people around you live a bit better, longer, healthier life without having to worry about certain things. Now, we know the statistics are with cancer. How much do you think that there are people walking around out there that causes themselves cancer on account of the stress that they have of not getting cancer? So there's no question that that's the case. There's a lot of psychosomatic weirdness going on. There's an inherent fear of death that's primal to human beings, and nobody talks about it. Nobody does. But that's what makes courage so valid and so valuable. And so what I'm getting at here is perhaps instead of stressing about the things and being anxious about the things that you have zero control over, maybe stop the dabbling and start learning as much as you can, so you can actually put actions where your thoughts are and do something about it, whether that's preventing disease prevention or raising your kids or being in good physical condition, whatever the case may be, mental, emotional wellness, all of those things. Apply that filter to absolutely any single realm and watch what happens.
Bam. Mic drop right there. Nick, you got any points to add to that?
Oh, yeah. I've walked that path. So everything that Seb just said resonates very deeply with me. When it comes to the, for instance, I never thought I would hear the C word in my life. I just didn't. Most of us don't. And then all of a sudden you hear it. You know, a lot of people don't think about, you know, circumstances to that level because it's too much. It's too much for them to like actually sit there and appreciate the fact that, you know, they haven't heard this word. The first time I heard the C word, and in relation to my health, it was the most fear I have ever felt in my life. But I owned it. And instead of sitting there and being a victim of my mind and my body, I chose to take that path of, I don't give a what it throws at me. I'm going to still get up and I'm going to still go achieve what I want to achieve in my life. And it was the most difficult thing I have ever experienced in my life. I had, just to dabble on it, my third surgery I had in 2022 was a Mohs surgery. I was cut open on a table, awake for 10 hours straight. And at the end of the surgery, I had an artery go, and the nurse had to come in while I was covered in blood and clamp my artery. And I was awake for this. And I went home and I sat on my couch alone after this surgery, just going, just another day. It wasn't just another day, but those experiences that I battled through by myself with my mind and those long hours of just intrusive thought, and it's the hardest thing a human being can go through in my mind. And when I look back at, you know, and that's just one of them. That's just one of the 4 surgeries. And, you know, looking back at all the scans and everything and the hard days and the doctor phone calls and the pressure that I applied to get everything done as fast as I could. And, you know, after these surgeries, I was in the gym 2 days after, 1 day after. There was some days I literally just, I got a surgery, or if I I was going through it, I'd be in the gym. I'd be doing martial arts. I'd be lifting. I made the choice to change my perspective. I didn't see it as I was dying. I saw it as, this is just the battle that I'm faced with right now, and we have to just get through it. And then you come out the other side very different from everybody else. And most people, and, you know, even, you know, when it comes to like specifically like fighters or pro athletes, when they go through like cancer circumstances or situations like this, most of them stop their sport. They stop adding stress to their life, especially when they're in remission. My mindset was like, nope, if that clock is ticking, just like Seb was saying, if you have oxygen in your lungs and you have the ability to get out of bed daily and put your feet on the ground and do something, you do it. It doesn't matter what you're going through. There's no, you know, I had some people checking in, but a lot of the time, you know, the people that you think are going to be there for you, especially during these circumstances, are not. Through and through in this life, we only have ourself. Yes, you're going to have supports. Yes, you're going to have good people. But on those hard days when the Reaper is just sitting there waving at you, it's not anyone else. It's you. You have to be the one to dictate the direction and the effort that you are going to put in daily, right?
Yeah, it is the fact that we rely very much on other people throughout our lives, which is, I think, a good thing. It develops a sense of community, but the knowledge that we are still on a solo journey is a key prospect here. Pat, you got any thoughts on this?
It's funny, I can't get the if this then that mantra out of my head because it's so simplistic. But where I was going to go was, living a violent life, whether it's career based, as in like you're in the military, or a fight base. I think the ability to take personal inventory, to retrospectively and think about the if this then that scenario, even preemptively into your life, creates a better, again, I'm going to use the human experience of the whole thing. Because I remember my first tour to Afghanistan. 2PPCLI were one of the first battle groups to be on the first boots on the ground. And none of us, I mean, we hadn't been in a conflict since Korea, right? So we were getting all this training, and like David Grossman came and talked to us, and this whole bit. And I literally had an inventory, like, I'm 20 something years old, and I have a full inventory of what would be acceptable and what wouldn't, right? Like death obviously being the ultimate sacrifice, but could I live without my eyes? Could I live without hearing? Can I live without an arm? You know what I mean? I already had these preemptively thought, if this then that, right? Like if I lose my legs, am I going to become like, I don't know, a Paralympic mountain bike racer when I make it back or whatever, right? And I had to have these kind of thoughts in my head in order to be able to go completely unselfishly into battle, right? I had to do that personal inventory. I had to be like, okay, if I lose my right arm, how am I going to live with a prosthetic? And I already had those pre-thought, and I went down into that deep part of your life of sacrifice and possible, damage, which then just made my experience as a soldier better because I could let go and do my job, right? But I could also, when I came out of that, be so freaking grateful that I have all my digits, and I didn't end up paying being injured, or like I went through my window of the infantry was I lost a lot of friends, right? And I live not just for myself but for them because they can't live it. So yeah, if this then that. It's such a broad, perfect mantra.
I love it. The funny thing is, when I was in Afghanistan, I was looking for IEDs and stuff like that. The mantra I had in my head was I'm either going to find it or I'm going to find it. I've made it was either the metal detector is going to pick it up or I'm going to step on it. There's no middle ground in there, and I was perfectly okay with that, because the worst experience for me would have been having someone behind me hit it. That was, I failed in my job completely. As an engineer, that's something you never want to have happen, and it did happen in times, but not for me, but for other people. And it's the personal inventory, taking that personal inventory ahead of time, I think is a very, very important thing. Now, I hate to do this, guys, but I got to shut her down. We're almost at 2 hours here. I've gotten a couple texts from my wife saying that I need to wrap it up. So I really do appreciate this. I know we could sit here and talk about this all day long, and we could probably make this a 4 or 5 hour conversation without any hesitation on it. But
well, hang on a sec. Nick still has to drop a couple more F-bombs.
A couple more, yeah. Just don't worry. That's all good. I'm going to get some editing practice after this one. No worries. But I really do appreciate the combo, guys. This has been a phenomenal experience, and I cannot wait to put this out. I'm sure the people out there are going to be enjoying this every single day once we release it. So any final thoughts at all? Nick, I'm going to hit you first. What do you think?
No final thoughts. This was a great conversation. Took a lot out of it.
Bam. I like it. Pat?
Yeah.
Final thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's one that kind of was mentioned a few times is the fact that we have a finite amount of time. No matter if you look at it from birth to a ripe old age, or you live shorter, or even your sport, like even for Nick, like we all understand, or we should bring aboard. We only have a finite amount of time to do certain things in our life, and especially when it comes to it doesn't matter if it's violence, academia, whatever, and how we want to structure that and live it, right?
Bam. I like it. Seb, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just quickly jump on something that Pat said, because it had extreme value as most of what was said in this conversation. But so what Pat was alluding to here earlier was positive reframing, right? Positively reframing what it is that's happening, what it is that can happen. Prepare for adversity through visualization, those types of things. That works well, but it only works well if you have associated value to the fundamental reason why you're doing it. So if Pat was playing around with a hand grenade with absolutely no concept of why he's there doing it, no amount of rationalization would get him out of a problem if he actually did deflagrate that grenade and lost his arm. So the point I'm making here is there needs to be a fundamental value to the things that you're engaging in. So if you're doing something that's completely meaningless right now, what are you doing it for? And so you can run contingencies all day. But the problem is if fundamentally it's flawed, because you should be engaging in something that's a lot more meaningful than that, what are you actually doing with your time? So running that inventory and really associated, not an exact amount of value, but enough for you to be convinced that what you are doing is what you should be doing, or it has meaning, it creates growth, it creates momentum, whatever it is, in order for your frames and your positive reframes to work in the event of something going sideways where you need those contingencies. So you can't lie to yourself, juggle with a grenade, and say, if I lose my 2 arms, I'll just do the Paralympics in foot ping pong, right? Because it's not going to work, because fundamentally you shouldn't be doing that, and you know it. So it's exactly the same. Assign some value, go into exploration, find things that are truly meaningful, and then your frames are going to be solid.
Love it. Shaun, final thoughts?
I'm going to throw out a brief piece here that I said in the green room. Nick, you weren't there, on the show on Wednesday. And what I'd said in the green room after the show was this: boys, thanks for being who you are. Thanks for being able to talk with cool people. Thanks for having the ability for me to learn as much as I do from these conversations. I look forward to these conversations because I don't get to have these kind of conversations with a lot of people. These kind of conversations are best served when you're speaking with someone who understands what you're talking about. And so it's helpful to me to be able to bounce ideas off of people who've been there and done that, who understand the violence game or understand the various topics that we cover on all of the episodes that we've had. And so it's not common to be able to sit down in a room where everyone can understands violence. And while at the same time demonstrating their humanism. I think that a lot of society sees men who are capable of violence as something less than human. And obviously, I don't see the world that way. I don't see my friends that way. But I think that society as a whole has got a misunderstanding when it comes to violence. So, again, to wrap up, thanks for being who you are. Thanks for living the lives that you've lived. Thanks for the sacrifices you've made. And thanks for not coming back on a shield so that you can spread the gospel of why violence is important.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add, just my own development of this concept. And I think that it kept coming back in my head over and over and over again was ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is bliss. No matter the people that have never experienced this kind of live a life of general unknowledge. I don't know if that's a word, but the cost of violence to me now is that ignorance. The moment you enter into that world, you lose that sense of ignorance and you start to see the world for what it is. And that's where the humanism starts to come into it, because you can either lose yourself to the darkness or you can stand up against the darkness and kind of gain that humanism more than you had it before. So again, thank you guys. It's just been an absolutely fantastic conversation. And as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see you next time. Chimo. Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see you all next time.